1.79 million year old cave discovery forces rethink of human evolution timeline. A groundbreaking discovery in South Africa is reshaping what scientists thought they knew about one of the most important milestones in human evolution, the control of fire. Now let's go beyond the surface and reveal every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
So think back to like the history or biology textbooks you had in school.
Right.
There is usually, a chapter or maybe just a few paragraphs or a single illustration dedicated to the exact moment early humans discovered fire.
Oh, yeah. It's always like a caveman banging two rocks together.
Exactly. Yeah. It is always framed as this singular dramatic moment, right? A literal and metaphorical spark that just ignited human civilization as we know it.
Yeah, the big turning point.
But what if that massive paradigm shift happened hundreds of thousands of years earlier than those textbooks claim?
Which is wild to even think about.
It really is. And that is exactly the reality. A 1.79 million-year-old layer of ash in South Africa's Wonderwerk cave is presenting to us right now. It is completely rewriting the timeline of human evolution.
It really is the kind of discovery that just forces us to reevaluate the entire human origin story. I mean, we are talking about moving the needle on our own behavioral evolution by a massive margin.
For a margin of almost a million years.
Exactly. It pushes the timeline of when our ancestors stopped just being subjects of their environment and actually started engineering it back almost a million years further than the scientific consensus previously allowed.
And that is why we are doing a deep dive into this today.
Okay.
We are looking at a groundbreaking study recently published in the journal PLOS1. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why this study is causing such a seismic shift in archaeological circles, we have to look at the accepted baseline first.
Yeah, the baseline is crucial here. So for decades, the benchmark for reliable controlled fire use by early hominins sat firmly at about 1 million years ago.
Which is already a really long time ago.
It is. And ironically, Wonderwerk Cave itself actually helped establish that original timeline.
Wait, really? The same cave?
The exact same cave, yeah. The site has been a cornerstone of paleoanthropology for a long time. During earlier excavations in the upper layers of the cave floor, researchers uncovered burned bone fragments, charred plant remains, and stone tools displaying clear thermal fracturing.
Oh, so tools that cracked from the heat of a fire.
Right, exactly. And all of that pointed to established fire use around the 1 million year mark. Finding evidence of camp files from 1 million years ago was already considered, a monumental triumph in tracing human behavioral complexity.
But the researchers behind this new study pushed deeper.
They did.
They excavated further down into the cave stratigraphy, looking at much older sediment layers, and that is where they found burned mammal bones, dating back an astonishing 1.79 million years.
Which completely upends everything.
Right, and we are talking about a time when the prime suspect for this activity would have been Homo erectus.
Yes, Homo erectus. And Homo erectus is just a fascinating evolutionary turning point.
They really are.
They lived roughly between 2 million and 100,000 years ago, making them one of the most successful and resilient hominin species to ever exist. I mean, unlike earlier ancestors such as Homo habilis.
Who were a bit more primitive.
Yeah, much more primitive. But Homo erectus presented a dramatically different anatomical and behavioral profile. They had a fully upright walking posture, advanced Acheulean stone tool technologies, and they were the first hominins to undertake massive geographic expansions out of Africa and into Eurasia.
Right. It is kind of like the evolutionary leap from Homo habilis to Homo erectus is like upgrading from a basic flip phone to a smartphone.
That is a great way to put it, actually.
Yeah, suddenly there are all these new features like upright walking, global migration, and advanced tools.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical upgrades are truly only half the story here. Their ability to thrive across varying ecosystems for nearly 2 million years required a level of behavioral plasticity that earlier hominins simply didn't possess.
Right, they couldn't just rely on basic biology anymore.
Exactly. And this new evidence from Wonderwerk Cave strongly suggests that mastering fire was the underlying mechanism that enabled that behavioral flexibility.
But couldn't this just be a random wildfire that blew into the cave? How do we know it was intentional? I mean, if I am an archaeologist looking at a piece of charcoal from almost 2 million years ago, my first instinct is to assume a lightning strike hit a dry savanna bush outside and the wind just blew the ash in.
That is a completely fair question. The burden of proof for intentionality is incredibly high in paleoanthropology. You have to rule out every natural variable.
So how do they do that?
Context and spatial distribution are the primary ways to eliminate the natural wildfire hypothesis. In this case, the 1.79-million-year-old burned bones were excavated 30 meters deep inside the Wonderwerk cave system.
Oh, wow. 30 meters. So that is well past the twilight zone of a cave entrance.
Way past it, yeah. A surface brush fire doesn't naturally propagate 30 meters deep into an enclosed rocky cavern devoid of a continuous fuel line.
Right. There are no bushes growing in the pitch black of a cave.
Exactly. And the spatial distribution of the evidence compounds that intentionality. These burned bones weren't just clustered in a single anomalous deposit.
Like a one-off accident.
Right. The researchers identified thermal signatures across multiple distinct stratigraphic layers.
This was happening over and over again.
Yes. This indicates that fire was transported into the depths of the cave, fueled and utilized repeatedly over successive generations. It demonstrates a sustained behavioral pattern rather than just some freak environmental anomaly.
Okay, so the location proves intentionality. But that still leaves a massive physical question.
Which is?
Well, after 1.79 million years, buried in sediment, organic material degrades.
Right.
And minerals from the surrounding soil leach into the fossils. So a bone stained black by manganese looks practically identical to a bone charred by a campfire.
Oh, yeah, they look exactly the same to the naked eye.
So how do scientists actually prove these bones were cooked and not just stained? They need a way to prove that the molecular structure of the bone itself was altered by intense heat.
And distinguishing between mineral staining and actual combustion is where the researchers utilized a highly precise, non-destructive technique. It is known as bone luminescence analysis.
Bone luminescence.
Yeah. It relies on the principle that intense heat permanently alters the crystalline lattice of the hydroxyapatite minerals within the bone.
Okay, so it essentially traps an energetic signature of the prehistoric fire inside the microscopic structure of the fossil itself.
Exactly.
As I understand it, when a bone is exposed to the intense heat of a hearth, structural defects form within the mineral crystals.
Yes. And over thousands of years, background radiation from the surrounding soil causes electrons to become trapped within those heat-induced defects.
So the bone is just sitting there in the dirt collecting trapped electrons for almost 2 million years.
That is the core mechanism, yeah. And to retrieve that trapped energetic signature, researchers place the fossilized fragments under a specialized microscope, and they stimulate them with a high-energy blue light.
And what does the blue light do?
If the bone was previously subjected to high heat, the blue light causes those trapped electrons to escape their crystalline constraints, releasing their stored energy in the form of photons.
So the bone literally emits a distinct red glow under the microscope.
It literally glows red, yes.
That is incredible. And if it only looks black because of manganese staining from the dirt, it won't luminesce at all.
Not even a little bit.
It is such a brilliant diagnostic tool because it solves a major bottleneck in paleontology. I mean, researchers can verify the thermal history of the artifact without having to grind up or destroy the priceless fossil they just spent years excavating.
Which is huge for conservation. The luminescence data provided undeniable confirmation of repeated localized burning. But proving the bones were intentionally burned is really only step one.
Right, because the monumental claim of this study is the specific date attached to those bones.
Exactly, the 1.79 million years. Dating an organic sample that old renders standard radiocarbon dating completely useless.
Because carbon-14 decays too fast, right?
Yeah, it decays to unmeasurable levels after about 50,000 years. So you can't use it for something almost 2 million years old.
So this requires moving away from dating the bone itself, and instead dating the geological matrix surrounding it. And to make a claim of 1.79 million years stick, the team actually utilized two completely independent chronological methods to cross-verify the timeline.
They had to be absolutely sure.
So the first method relies on paleomagnetism, which basically reads the geological history of the Earth's magnetic field locked in the cave dirt.
Right, because the Earth's magnetic field is not static. It undergoes periodic polarity reversals where magnetic north and south essentially swap places.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is, and these reversals happen irregularly over millions of years. Now, as fine dust and iron-bearing sediments slowly accumulate on a cave floor, the microscopic magnetic particles within that dust act like tiny compass needles.
Oh, so they align themselves with whatever the Earth's magnetic polarity happens to be at the time they settle.
Exactly. And once that sediment is compacted, those microscopic compass needles are locked in place forever.
So the scientists aren't just looking for one random flip in the dirt. They are analyzing vertical core samples of the cave floor to find a specific sequence of normal and reversed polarities stacked on top of each other.
Right. They then take that sequence and cross-reference it against the established global geomagnetic polarity timescale.
It is kind of like matching a specific pattern of wide and narrow tree rings to a master climate record to find an exact year.
That is a perfect analogy. The paleomagnetic sequence provided a really solid chronological framework. But to ensure absolute precision, they coupled it with cosmogenic nuclide dating.
Okay, cosmogenic nuclide dating. That sounds intense.
It sounds like sci-fi, but it focuses on the decay of specific rare isotopes, namely aluminum-26 and beryllium-10.
And those are created by cosmic ray spallation, right?
Yes.
So cosmic rays, which are essentially high-energy protons from outside our solar system, constantly bombard the surface of the Earth. And when they strike the quartz minerals and surface rocks, they alter the atomic structure, creating those rare isotopes.
But the creation of those isotopes only happens when the quartz is exposed to the open sky.
That is the key detail.
Right, because the moment those quartz particles are washed or carried deep into Wonderwerk Cave, they are shielded from the cosmic radiation by meters of solid rock overhead.
So the production of new isotopes immediately stops.
Exactly. And the existing aluminum-26 and beryllium-10 begin to radioactively decay at different well-understood rates.
It is literally the equivalent of a geological hourglass that only starts running the moment the sand is buried in the dark.
Yes. And because aluminum-26 decays faster than beryllium-10, scientists can measure the current ratio of the two isotopes remaining in the sediment to calculate an incredibly precise burial age for the dirt surrounding the burned bones.
That is just brilliant.
And when the research team overlaid the paleomagnetic sequence data with the cosmogenic isotope ratios, both independent biological and geological clocks synchronized perfectly, the sediment layer containing the burned bones unequivocally dated to 1.79 million years ago.
Okay, so we've established a rock-solid timeline, and we know Homo erectus was transporting fire 30 meters deep into the cave.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The microanalysis of these burned bone fragments revealed an incredibly unexpected detail regarding the logistics of cave survival.
The owl pellets.
Yes, the owl pellets. I mean, you would naturally assume the ash layers would be packed with charcoal from wood, right?
That would be the logical assumption.
But the researchers found that these tiny burned bones were actually embedded inside fossilized raptor pellets.
Yeah, the taphonomic analysis, which is the study of how these deposits formed, indicates a highly specific fuel source. For those who might not know, predatory birds like owls routinely swallow their small mammalian prey whole.
Right, they don't chew.
Exactly. Their digestive systems process the meat and then they regurgitate the indigestible feathers and bones as densely compacted pellets.
And owls frequently roost in the high crevices of cave systems. So over time, the floor beneath them just becomes blanketed in these dry, fibrous masses.
Literally covered in them.
Finding burned bone fragments inside an ash layer is one thing. But discovering that those specific fragments originated from fossilized owl pellets completely changes the narrative for me.
Oh, it completely shifts our understanding.
It suggests that Homo erectus wasn't just dragging random branches into the cave. They were deliberately gathering these dry, concentrated masses of carbon and phosphorus from the cave floor to use as tinder or sustained fuel.
Which is incredibly smart. The thermodynamics of cave fires make this a highly advantageous strategy.
How so?
Well, burning raw, damp wood collected from outside generates massive amounts of smoke. And in an enclosed cave system, that smoke can quickly become toxic, or at least visually impairing.
It's like when you are a camper desperately trying to find dry kindling in the woods after a rainstorm. You're just fighting the smoke the whole time.
Exactly. But owl pellets, being highly compressed, dry, organic matter, tend to smolder. They provide a steady, slow-burning heat source with significantly less smoke output.
These early humans were like the ultimate survivalists, utilizing literally everything in their environment, even owl vomit, to keep the lights on.
What's fascinating here is that utilizing raptor pellets demonstrates a profound level of environmental curation.
It requires an abstract understanding of materials.
Precisely. Homo erectus had to recognize that a biological byproduct littering the floor was actually a highly efficient combustible resource. That points to a level of foresight and planning, gathering, and stockpiling specific dry materials to ensure the fire doesn't die out during the night.
They aren't just reacting, they're preparing.
Right. It reveals a cognitive architecture that is beginning to plan for future states rather than just reacting to immediate stimuli. They are actively managing resources to maintain a microclimate of their own creation.
And that microclimate is so important.
It is. The The mastery of fire is the pivotal threshold in our evolutionary history, precisely because of the cascading biological and behavioral effects it triggers.
So what does this all mean for us today? Obviously, fire provides immediate benefits. It pushes back the darkness, allowing hominins to remain active and socialize after the sun goes down.
Which extends their day significantly.
Right. It provides a thermal buffer against freezing temperatures and acts as a highly effective deterrent against Ice Age predators. But the most transformative impact of this 1.79 million-year-old controlled fire isn't about ambient heat.
No, it is about cooking.
Yes, it is about what fire allows you to do to your calories.
The control of fire is the absolute prerequisite for the cooking hypothesis. This is a theory that explains the rapid and massive expansion of the hominin brain.
Because the human brain is a metabolically ravenous organ.
Whoa, it is incredibly greedy for energy. Despite accounting for only about 2% of our total body weight, our brain consumes roughly 20% of our resting metabolic energy.
And that energy requirement presents a massive biological bottleneck. If a species is subsisting entirely on raw, tough root vegetables and scavenged, uncooked meat, the digestive tract has to work incredibly hard just to break down those complex fibers and proteins.
It takes hours of chewing and digesting.
Right. A massive portion of the body's daily energy budget is just tied up in the sheer mechanical and chemical labor of digestion.
And you cannot biologically support both a massive complex digestive system processing raw food and a massive energy-hungry brain.
It is an evolutionary zero-sum game.
Exactly. But cooking fundamentally alters that equation. When you apply sustained heat to meat and tubers, you gelatinize the starches and denature the tough collagen proteins.
You are essentially outsourcing the mechanical labor of digestion to the fire.
Yes.
By breaking down the cellular structure of the food before it even enters the mouth, early humans drastically increased the net caloric yield of every meal. They spent less time chewing, less energy digesting, and suddenly had a massive surplus in their metabolic budget.
And where did that surplus go?
The evolutionary pressure shifted, allowing the digestive tract to shrink, while rerouting all of those newly available calories to fund the expansion of the cerebral cortex.
Now, the PLOS, one study on Wonderwerk Cave, does not provide direct evidence of formal hearths used specifically for roasting meat 1.79 million years ago.
Right, we aren't seeing barbecue pits just yet.
No. However, by pushing the timeline for the reliable control of fire back so far, it proves that the foundational behavioral prerequisite for cooking was established in deep antiquity.
The stage was set.
The environmental mastery required to maintain fire existed early enough in the Homo erectus timeline to perfectly align with the rapid encephalization, the brain growth, we observe in the fossil record.
It grounds a theoretical biological concept in hard archaeological data, and it connects directly to you, the listener. Every time you turn on a stove or flick a light switch to illuminate a dark room, or even just enjoy a warm meal, you are directly participating in a 1.79 million-year-old behavioral legacy.
A legacy that quite literally shaped us.
Yes. The act of gathering around a smoldering pile of curated tinder in a South African cave literally altered the metabolic constraints of our species. It provided the neurological processing power necessary to eventually engineer the modern world.
And the brain power.
Okay, one question for you. How might the discovery of fire use dating back nearly 1.7 million years in Wonderwerk cave completely changed our understanding of when early humans first developed cognitive abilities linked to planning, survival strategy, and environmental control? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.